Alright, Assalamualaikum and very good morning to all the audience. So this will be the last part from practice and the course of motor control and learning or motor learning and control. There are two different courses with um, the same input. So this will be the last part for practice subchapter. Okay, for this part, we are going to discuss about two things. The first one is whole and part practice, and the second one will be regarding mental practice. So let's go with that. Right. When we talk about whole and part practice, whether we want to practice the skill a whole, means from start to the end, or we want to practice the skill in parts, means we are going to go phase by phase in the practice. To answer that one, we are going to discuss a bit about complexity and organization. There are two things in one skill. Okay, where complexity can be referred as the number of parts or component in a skill, as well as the attention or component in a skill, as well as the attention demand of the task. This means that a highly complex skill will have many components and demand much attention, especially from a beginners. Okay, so when we talk about a complex skill, it means that the skill, in order for you to execute that particular skill, one skill, it involves multiple phases, a lot of phases. Okay, for example, we take archery, there are roughly 5 to 7 to even 9 differentiation or segmentation that need to be conduct in order to execute one shot. It depends on a different school of thought. Some say 5, some say 7, some say 9, some say 14. So that are the differentiation. Or if we compare with, let's say, passing in soccer. So there are roughly 3 to 4 steps in order for you to execute passing itself. Less number of step or phases means the skill is less complex. Itu yang pertama, complexity. And the second one, um, before we go to the second one, it is important for you to keep complexity differ compared to difficulty. It does not mean if the task is complex, it's difficult. And it does not mean if it is not difficult, the task will be simple in terms of complexity. No. So complexity is the number of phases. Difficulty is the intensity of the execution. There are two distinct features. Okay, to complexity. And the second one, we talks about organization. Okay, organization. When the component parts are spatially and temporally interdependent. This means that the successive parts of a highly organized skill are like a chain of events in which the spatial temporal performance character of any one part are dependent on the special temporal performance character of the part performed just before. Means that when we talk about organization, the continuation, there are skills that every single phase is continuated between one another. You cannot skip a phase, or you cannot mix a phase. Phase 1 needs to come before phase 2. Phase 2 needs to come before phase 3, and they are interconnected with one another. If you have flaws on phase 1, phase 2 haywire. If you are good at phase 1, you can conduct a good phase 2, and it continue. So if the execution of the skill is like that, the skill is highly organized. Contoh kita ambil 100 meter sprinting. Okay. We have sprint start, we have running, we have ending, and it is actually quite high in terms of organization. Means the phases is interrelated with one another. You have a good sprint start, you're going to get a good run up. You are going to get a good ending. So organization dia tinggi. Okay, so in contrast, a skill has a low of organization when the Spatial temporal relation among the component part of a skill are relatively independent. Okay. As a result, it is possible to practice any one component part by itself because its spatial temporal performance character do not depend on those of the part that precede it. Tu kalau kita punya organisation rendah. Okay, so ni term organization and also complexity. Okay. So based on Naylor and Brigg hypothesis, it said that assessing those level of complexity and organization of a skill determine the relationship helps to decide whether you are going to use a whole practice ataupun part practice strategy. If the skill is low in complexity but high in organization, it is better to choose whole practice. Maksudnya kita tak boleh dah nak practice phase 1, lepas tu practice phase 2, lepas tu practice phase 3, one by one, because you are not going to see the continuation. Kalau skill tu complex, macam kata sprint start, you practice start je, and then you practice run up saja, and then you practice ending. Tak boleh macam tu. We need to practice it as a whole. You give them, okay, this is start, this is run up, this is ending. You give them the whole pictures. Tapi kalau kita ambil macam bola sepak, so we have passing, we have dribble, we have heading. We can actually teach each and every single skill part by part. Ini kita boleh belajar heading je. Kita tak perlu belajar permainan satu bola sepak. Maksudnya because of the skill is not complex. The skill is simple. So you can divide the skill accordingly to their part and practice that part. You don't need to practice a whole. Tu maksud skill yang complex and skill yang tak complex. Okay, so if the skill is low in complexity, means phases dia kurang, but organized. Okay, organization dia tinggi, recommended to use whole. Tapi people learn relatively simple skill in which the few component part are highly related, most effectively using the whole practice method. But if the skill are high in complexity but low in organization, use part method. Okay, apa maksud low complexity? The first one, low complexity but high in organization means that the skill phase or the component within the skill itself is interconnected or interrelated with one another. You need to be excel every single part of that in order to get a good outcome. High organization. But if low organization means the skill within that particular particular performance is not interrelated with one another. You can excel in skill A but not in skill B. You can excel in skill B but not excel in skill C. Maksudnya dia tak berkait antara satu sama lain. So you can train that skill one by one. Trainlah skill A dulu. Lepas tu trainlah skill B. Lepas tu trainlah skill C. You don't need to have everything in one session. Itu maksud part practice. Okay. So the rule of thumb, skill complex. Okay. Bila skill tu complex, organization dia rendah, part practice. Means that there are a lot of skill but they are not interconnected with one another. Part practice. But if the skill is low in complexity, the part is simple, small. Okay, the part is not that much. But all those parts is interconnected with one another. Whole practice. Okay, whole practice. Okay, contoh macam kita ambil cycling. Alright. Training balance. Training translation. Forward cycling. These two things is interconnected because you need to be able to cycle the bike and balance at the same time. They interconnected. Phase tak banyak, maksudnya tak kompleks. Whole practice. Okay, whole practice. Okay, kita ambil softball, run up, pitching, batting, catching. All of that, there are a lot of skill that need to be learned in order to play softball. Okay, but all of that skill is not related or interconnected with one another. due to that, you can actually learn all those skills in part practice. Continuous, discrete, and serial. Baru cakap dia dah keluar dah. So according to taxonomy, continuous and serial skill will be quite high in complexity but would differ in organisation. Dia ada yang tinggi organisation, ada yang rendah organisation. Discrete skill are low in complexity, part dia rendah. Okay, dia punya part tu rendah. Okay, so due to this, it is advisable for you to use continuous and serial, which is high in complexity, we use part. But for discrete, since it is low in complexity, we use whole practice. Belajar semua sekali. Dia tak kompleks. Okay, so benda yang kompleks ni, kita kena pecahkan dia phase by phase. So we go one by one. Okay, to be easy lah. Okay, so serial skill, which is high in organisation, also varied according to the skill. Jadi kalau kita tengok sini, continuous dengan serial ni, there sometimes can be complex, sometimes can be simple. So sometimes it can be high in organisation, sometimes it can be low in organisation. So if it is high in organisation, okay, high in organisation, we use whole practice. But if the skill is low in organisation, we use part practice. Tu beza dia lah antara dua tu. Okay, if the skill is complex, sangat banyak pecahan, but it is not interrelated with one another, low organisation, part practice. But the skill, if the skill is low in complexity, it means the part is lesser. Okay, part is lesser, but organisation of it is high, you need to go for whole practice. Cara dia. Okay, kita buat ni. Curveball. Okay, we go for curveball. You are going to have run up, you are going to have contact, you are going to have follow through. 3 je. Complexity? Tak. Okay, tak. Tapi, can we train these 3 things separately? Hari ni kita belajar run up. Besok kita belajar contact je. Lusa kita belajar follow through je. So they are no interrelated with one another. You are not going to get a good outcome. So we are going to say that this kind of skill is quite high in organisation because we cannot divide the phases in separately. We need to train that in one session. So this skill is high organisation skill. How to practice that? Whole practice. You need to see the whole. Okay, you need to see the whole. Okay, we go to archery. Okay, we go to archery. First phase, stance. Multiple type of stance. And then we have draw. And then we have aiming. And then we have release. And then we have follow through. Okay, 5 kita ambil. Asas 5. These 5 different phases can actually be trained one by one. Okay, for the first session, we train about stance saja. Stand A, stand B, stand C. Find your comfortable stand. And then we go for drawing. Drawing for stand A, line macam mana. Drawing for stand B, the line is like what. And then the drawing for stand C. And then we go to aiming and holding. And then we go to release. So kita akan buat phase by phase. And then we go follow through. And then we are going to combine all. Itu kita panggil sebagai part practice. Because the organisation is quite low. Jadi kamu boleh belajar satu and towards the end we can sum up or we can have the whole performance. That is the difference between high organisation and low organisation. So most of the time if the organisation is low, the complexity of the skill is going to be quite high. Banyak phases. Okay, and most of the time when the complexity is quite low, you are going to get quite high organisation. High organisation, whole practice. Low organisation, part practice. Itu rule of thumb dia. Okay. So, how we want to make our practice become part? This is some strategy for us that we can have in order to make the practice become part. Okay. So, first we go for fractionalization, a part task training method related to asymmetric coordination that involve practicing each arm or leg separately before performing with them together. For example, we go swimming. Kita belajar stroke. Okay, stroke. Tangan kiri pegang kickboard, tangan kanan stroke. And then we go tangan kanan pegang kickboard, tangan kiri stroke. Habis dua-dua tangan, now we combine all those. That is fractionalization. Practice part by part. By body part is what I mean. Okay, number 2 is segmentation. A part task training method involves separating the skill into parts and then practicing the parts so that after one part is practiced, it is then practiced together. Okay, macam archery tadi, kita ada 5 part. Okay, we have stance, we have set up, we have drawing, we have release, we have follow through. Okay, segmentation said that we practice stance first. Finish practice stance, everybody had grasped the idea of how to stand. We practice stance and set up. And then when everybody finish practicing set up, we go for stance, set up, drawing, and towards the end we are practicing a lot of ball segment. That is called segmentation. Practice one part and then combine that with the second one. Now you dah ada 2. And then combine that with the third one. Now you dah ada 3. Yang pertama tu kita tak lupa, we bring forward. Okay, and then we have simplification. A part task training method involve reducing the difficulty of specific part or features of a skill. Okay, contoh kita nak belajar golf. Okay, golf swing. So we start with swing without ball. Itu maksud simplification. We make it easy because the intention, the focus is actually on how to execute the swing. Lepas tu kita buat apa? Kita letak bola. Kita swing. Letak bola atas rumput dengan letak bola atas tee, mana senang? Atas tee. We use tee. Itu means of simplification. So we conduct what we call it a modified strategy. Okay, we modified the strategy in order to make the task easier so that the athletes can actually focus on the outcome itself. Itu tiga cara lah. Dan yang keempat, we reduce object difficulty. Means we change the object. If the actual object is small, we make it bigger. Okay, kalau macam squash, like squash, like kita ambil squash. The squash ball, they have multiple types, semua hitam, but the dot is different. Kita ada dot merah, kita ada dot kuning, kita ada dot putih, kita ada double dots. All those dotted give you one meaning, the rebound rate of the ball. Kalau competition selalu dia pakai ball kuning dengan ball putih, dia rebound sikit. Means bila dia kena, dia rebound sikit. Tapi kalau ball merah tu dia rebound tinggi. So for training, red will be used because it bounce higher. So it is easier for beginners to actually hit the ball compared to yellow and white. So we reduce the difficulty of the task. And then we reduce attention demand, reduce cognitive effort. When you see attention demand, it means cognitive effort. Reduce task difficulty by reducing complexity by providing physical assistance device that allow the person to practice the goal of the skill but at the same time reduce the attention demand of the task. Okay, contoh kita buat batting. Okay, kita buat batting dekat dalam softball. So in real world, when you bat a softball, it will be thrown by somebody, and when a thrown ball, it is quite unpredictable where it will land. Kiri, kanan, atas, bawah, it can go anywhere. So how we want to reduce attention demand? How we want to reduce your cognitive effort on focusing the ball? We need you to use the cognitive effort to focus on the action. Instead of being thrown, we are going to use static T. Letak bola dekat atas. So now the ball does not move. We reduce attention demand by reducing object difficulty. Now you can easily hit the ball. Itu dia maksud. Okay, and then we reduce speed. A learner first practice a skill can simplify practice. This approach places emphasis on the relative time relation among the skill component and the special character of performing the whole skill. We reduce the speed. Example, kita ambil softball tadi. Okay, an actual pitch in Malaysia will cost around 70 kilometer per hour to 80 kilometer per hour, the speed of the ball. So it is hard for beginners to actually hit the ball. So how we want to ensure that they can hit, we reduce the speed paling slow sikit. Ini sebenarnya cara, okay. This is actually some way for you to practice part, okay. Using part practice. So part practice is not always practice that in part, but this is some other strategy that can be used, and it is also known as part practice. Practice with a slower speed, and then we increase the speed. Tu part practice lah tu. Okay, and then we have adding auditory cue. Okay, sometimes when we have cues, it helps. Okay, ni macam topik feedback. Feedback lah. Demonstration and instruction. We have cue. Okay, when we try to hit something, kita buat benda tu banyak kali tak dapat because we have problem in determining spatial and temporal. Contoh macam nak hit tadi lah. Okay, kita nak hit. Hayun-hayun bola dah lepas. Hayun-hayun bola dah lepas. But if you get a cue from the coach, when you hear I say go, you swing. Now, bila coach tu balik dia cakap go, kau pun swing. That helps you to time. Okay, whenever you heard go, you swing. Kamu dah tak fokus kat bola. Because when you focus dekat bola, selalunya bola dah lepas baru kamu swing. That is what we mean by adding auditory cues. And then we have sequencing skill progression. Learner practice variation of the skill being learned in sequence from the most simple until the most difficult. Belajar yang paling senang. Lepas tu, increase the intensity of the skill being proposed. Okay, and then we have using either simulators or virtual reality. Before you go straight to the field, you go with VR first. Main dekat VR. Sampailah dapat feeling. Orang kata dapat feeling. Basically, your muscle have the memory. So now you're going to bring the memory in actual condition. This is some sort of methods or strategy that can be used for simplification. Okay. And then we have miming. We actually mime the task. Okay, mime the task performance. Pergi situ acah-acah buat. Okay, acah-acah buat. Miming ni dia ada satu je lah caution dia. When you try to mime, make sure it is actually correct technique, or else it will be stored in your mind as DMP and you're going to execute the incorrect technique. Okay. Alright, and then we have sometimes it is not advisable or practical to separate the part of a skill physically for practice. It is beneficial to practice the whole skill, but focus attention on specific part that need extra works. This is actually approach on involving part practice dalam whole practice. Tadi yang kita dah belajar satu skill as a whole because the organisation is quite high, 100 meter sprint, high organisation. So we need to practice the skill as a whole. But now, how we want to include part practice. Kamu belajar 100 meter sprint and you notice that your sprint is good but the starting is bad. Jadi kita akan buat part practice just for starting block. And then combine with the whole practice. Ni maksud dia. Okay, kita akan ambil technique or the skill that you are flaws the most, and that will be practice as part. So we combine both part practice and whole practice. Bila kita kata part practice, macam mana kita nak bagi dia part practice kat sini? Okay, kita mudahkan dia. Kita add auditory cues dekat starting position sahaja. Because that one is part practice. This is actually how we want to include part in whole practice. Okay, and based on both attention theory and research, it support this attention approach. Kahneman model of attention explain an important factor in attention allocation, which is called momentary intention. So momentary intention can be having by part practice. Okay, and when applied to a performance situation, this factor comes into play when a person focus his or her attention on a specific. So bila dia fokus dekat satu benda tu, dia cuba untuk what we call it, make a correction, polish it up only on that particular part sahaja. Tu kita maksudkan dengan involving part practice in whole practice. Okay. So that will be all for whole and part practice. So I recall it a bit. When we talk about whole and part nak practice semua satu skill tu A sampai Z, ataupun kita nak practice satu skill tu part by part, A dulu, lepas tu B, lepas tu C, lepas tu which is phases dekat dalam dia. So to do so, first determine skill ni kompleks ke tidak, banyak part tak. Kalau skill banyak sangat part, means the skill is complex. Part practice. Part practice. Belajarlah part by part. Okay. Nak buat macam mana nak cakap skill tadi? We go with, let's say, frisbee. Okay, let's say frisbee. In order to throw a disc, you need to have good stance. You need to have a good posture. You need to learn to flick. Okay. And there are multiple type of throw. Ada yang throw standard, ada yang buat hammer throw lah. All of that means throw saja there are a lot of variation. Ni maksudnya skill ni kompleks. Okay, because there's a lot of parts. So macam mana nak practice? Part practice lah, complex skill. We can learn normal throw dengan hammer throw differently. It does not relate with one another. Means the skill is not interrelated. Organisation dia rendah. Okay, so bila organisation dia rendah, complexity is high, part practice. Okay, and then kita tengok satu skill dalam tu je, throwing tadi. So in order for you to throw, the phases is interconnected with one another. Whole practice means that action is less in complex, but it has continuation between those action parts. Kita tak boleh lah nak belajar flick, tak belajar release. Kan? Kita tak boleh lah nak belajar aiming, tak belajar flick. So we need to have the whole of that satu skill as whole. Tapi bila kita cerita executing frisbee game, there's a lot. So you need to conduct part. Bila belajar satu benda tu, we need to conduct that in whole. Ataupun kita ambil skill yang any skill, let's say football ataupun netball, chest pass. Okay, we go with chest pass. So we need to have stance, we need to have push action, aiming. Benda ni kita tak boleh belajar satu-satu. Aim je, tak push pun. Push je tak payah aim, tak boleh. It is interrelated. Banyak tak phase untuk buat chest pass? No, the phases is just some phases. So the complexity is low, but those phases is interconnected with one another. High organisation, whole practice. Dia cara untuk pilih whole ke part practice. And these two type of practice can be include in whether you use block or mesh practice region. Okay, so this will be the first topic. So let's go to the second one. And this one is regarding mental practice. This is the last one in our quotes. Okay, when we talk about mental practice, we can define mental practice as cognitive rehearsal. Rehearsal is practice lah. Cognitive rehearsal of a physical skill in the absence of overt physical movement. Practice physically kat sini. Tu mental practice. Nak cerita. Okay, that is what we can define mental practice. Practice physically dekat sini. Practice physically without ever moving. Okay, so it can take the form of thinking about the cognitive or procedural aspect of a motor skill, or engaging in visual or kinesthetic imagery. So here I need you to focus on these two terms, visual and kinesthetic imagery. This is part of mental practice. So in mental practice, if the practice involve visual imagery, okay, so kita ada dua type of imagery. Now dalam visual practice ni, it can be viewed in two condition. Satu, we call it as internal view. Number two, we call it as an external view. For gamers, internal view ni macam first person first person shooting action. Kalau external ni macam third person. Internal ni macam kita main kalau dulu-dulu kita main Counter Strike. Okay, Counter Strike Half-Life. Ataupun kita main Call of Duty yang nampak tangan je, kita tak nampak badan, tak nampak kepala. So in internal, we actually imagine we are conducting the skill. In external, third person view, maksudnya kita nampak the whole person, nampak kepala, nampak badan, nampak tangan. Such as we observing our own self conducting the skill. Nombor satu, we are the one who conduct that. We see like now, we see like what you have seen now, nampak tangan sendiri. So that is first person or internal. External, kita tengok, macam kita tengok, aku tengah buat apa external, you see your whole self there. That is external. Okay, so this is the definition lah. Internal, the individual approximate the real life situation in such a way that the person actually imagine being inside his or her body and experiencing those sensations, which might be expected in the real situation. While external is when the person view himself or herself from the perspective of an observer. Maksudnya kita tengok buat benda tu. First person, kita rasa kita tengah buat. Third person, kita tengok kita buat. Okay. So these are some rule of mental practice. There are a lot of others. Okay. Mental practice can be used as a mean of action preparation. Means we use that for preparation. And then mental practice is also a mean of facilitating storage and retrieval. Okay. If you still remember our topic of memory, when we talk about storage and retrieval, ini ada kaitan langsung dengan proses rehearsal. When we send information to the long term and we try to retract it back. We send it to long term and then we try to track it back. The more you do this thing, the easiest for you to access the information. This thing is called rehearsal ataupun practice. Okay, practice. But now, instead you practice in term of physical, practice buat golf swing. Now you practice performing golf swing internally. Okay, imagery. Right. So mental practice aids skill acquisition. Experiment comparing condition of physical practice versus mental practice versus physical and mental practice. Okay. So we have an experiment. Okay. We have an experiment where we conduct free throw. Basketball free throw in 3 conditions. 1, the person perform 40 times free throw basketball. Dia pergi dekat court basketball, dia throw 40 kali. Pop. Okay. Condition number 2. The person, okay, perform 40 throw imagery. Dia duduk bayangkan 40 throw. Pop, 1 masuk. Pop, 2 masuk without ever moving. And the third group, they perform 20 imagery throwing and 20 physical throwing. Combination of both physical and mental. Okay. When the result come out, okay, so result dia dapat daripada mana? All of them from those 3 group will perform an actual, shot to the basket. Okay, tadi dia buat 40 kali kan? Now, it is an actual shot of 20 times. Okay, so based on the result, it find out that the group that scored the most is actually physical practice group. Okay, and the second group that scored the most is physical plus mental practice group. And finally, the group which involve only mental practice. So there are actually another group which does not do any practice. Dia duduk je saja masa orang buat 40 throw tu. And then they go for a trial tu. This is called a control group. So control group score the least, paling last sekali. So based on this, it show that kita ambil condition yang tengah-tengah. Condition mental versus no practice, control. Based on this experiment, we can see that mental practice give effect. Okay, if we compare mental and control group, mental practice score more compared to control group, which means that if you do practice mentally, it still give effect to the outcome. However, if we compare mental and physical practice, physical definitely will give you much effect. Dia lah yang paling excel sekali, because when we go physical, we have all the information needed in order to execute. When we go mental, we have the GMP, but the GMP is still lacking in terms of several variable. How fast, how much, benda-benda macam tu yang dia tak buat, tak ada lah dalam information GMP itu. Cuma dekat sini, you need to bear in mind that mental give effect if there are no chances for you to go for physical. Contoh, footballers injured, nak main pergi padang tak boleh. So instead of doing nothing, they can actually go for mental practice, because it helps. Although the degree of increment is not going to be similar as physical, yet it will give effect. Tu maksud yang bawah tu lah, mental practice aid skill acquisition. Alright, and then this is some benefit of mental practice. The first one is in term of rehabilitation. Ni macam yang saya cakap tadi lah. In addition to being beneficial for the acquiring of new skill, mental practice can be effective for relearning the skill, as well as for the improvement of skill if you don't have chances to go physical. Power training, comparison of training methodology with mental practice, without mental practice. We can see some increment, an extra increment for the group that go for mental practice. Okay, and then part of general preparation strategy, five-step general learning strategy involve element of mental practice. Means when we try to learn something, okay, this is the 5 step of us learning new skill. And in these 5 steps, 3 of them involve cognitive. Means mental practice is important in order for you to get a skill. First, get ready physical, mentally, and emotional. To learn new thing, you need to get ready mental and physical. Next, mentally imaging performing the skill. I know that most of you conduct this thing. Sebelum buat, contoh lah kan, contoh kita ambil benda simple. Petang-petang pergi main bowling dengan kawan-kawan. So when you go to the bowling alley, before you throw, for sure you are going to imagine how I want to throw this ball. Nak baling macam mana ni, terbayang lah siapa-siapa yang kamu pernah tengok kat je, and then you try to execute as whatever thing that you imagine there. Tu mental practice lah in term of mentally imaging. Okay, lagi kita sambung kepada ni dua ni. Visually and kinesthetic. It has a direct relation with this slide. Okay, mental imagery can be either visual or kinesthetic. Nanti kita tengok apa itu. Okay, and then concentrating intensely on only one relevant cue related to the action, such as the seam of a tennis ball. Okay, when you execute, you are going to concentrate on execution. Concentrate is mental, again, mental practice. And then execute the action, that will be physical, and finally evaluate the performance. Okay. Alright, and these are 5 period of time where athlete usually conduct mental practice. Okay, the first one during training. Masa tengah training tu dia pakai mental practice. Tengah-tengah training, macam mana nak buat benda ni? Mentally practice. Dapat balik cara dia nak buat. Number 2, period between competitive event 1 and event 2. In between that, you are going to use mental practice. Try to execute the skill as good as possible for the next one. And then immediately prior to competitive event, dah ada dekat atas pitch ni, okay, try to do let's say penalty kick. So before you do penalty kick, you are going to use mental practice. How I want to execute a good penalty kick. And then during competitive event, tengah main pun boleh pakai mental practice. Tengah main, lupa, ataupun you plan on how to execute the next step. That is mental. Okay, and finally, rehabilitating an injury. When physical is not possible, go with mental, because it gives effect. Okay, and this is some of the way on how mental practice works. First is by neuromuscular hypothesis, see that there are notion trees that mental practice of a motor skill has a neuromuscular basis. We attach EMG. Okay, we attach EMG to the muscles and we ask the patient to think. Try to think moving your bicep and tricep, contract and extract, but don't do it physically. Means dia cuba bayangkan, and we are going to see a trace. Okay, we are going to see a trace of impulse towards EMG reading. Maksudnya kat sini bergerak, muscle dia akan twitching. Okay, means that if you imagine on kicking a ball, all the muscle involved in kicking a ball is going to being activated, and that is going to be stored the information. Number 2, brain activity hypothesis. It said that the result of brain imaging study shown that when a person imagine moving a limb, brain activity is similar to when the person physically moving the limb. Tadi kita cerita EMG, now kita cerita EEG, letak kat kepala. Okay? Okay, imagine movingkan tangan kanan, dia pun imagine bergerak tangan kanan. EMG said that there are twitch of impulse. EEG pun bagi result yang sama. Physically or mentally, the part that control that muscle will be activated. And those will be stored into your GMP. So they related. Dia cerita benda yang sama. Both muscles and brain. And the last one is cognitive hypothesis. Cognitive is cognitive effort lah, thinking ability. Researchers generally agree that the first stage of learning a motor skill involves a high degree of cognitive activity. Mental practice will be an effective strategy for people acquiring new skill or relearning an old one. Okay, let's recall back what we have learned in neuromuscular basis of motor control. Okay, graph yang last kali, the last diagram which show you the pathway of information processing from central executive up until motor level, from the brain to the muscles. Okay, so based on cognitive hypothesis, that whatever thing that you try to start, it will start at the top, the central executive. Kat mana dia tu? Enter. So means that whatever execution of skill that you intend to conduct, it will start mentally. So if you polish this one, you're going to get a better outcome of the skill itself. Tu masuk yang last, cognitive hypothesis. Okay. Alright, so kita kembali kepada yang ini. When we talk about mental practice, imagery, either internal or external, it can be divided into two: visual imagery and kinesthetic imagery, and actually both. Okay, so visual imagery, we can define that as imagery of conducting the skill. Okay, example like my sport. In archery, when we use imagery, we are going to imagine we are standing on the shooting lane. Okay, we are standing on the shooting lane, focusing towards the target. We have our equipment with us, and we are going to imagine conducting the action. Bangun, tarik, aiming, and finally release. That is visual imagery, a basic visual imagery. To be better, you need to have kinesthetic imagery. Now, the first step, like I said earlier, we are going to imagine we are standing on the shooting lane. With kinesthetic imagery, we are going to enhance our imagery by adding some other information, such as the feeling of the ground. Kita boleh rasa, kinesthetic is rasa. Now, kita boleh merasa feeling dekat kaki. Kaki ni tak balance, so we try to balance thing up. We can feel the wind, we can feel the heat, we can feel the cold. And when you start pulling the bow, you can actually feel the force at the string. When you release, you can feel the force moving through the bow. You can feel the arrow flying. Feel. Visual is just only visualize. But when we talk about kinesthetic, we are going to include feel. And when the arrow touch or hit the center of the target, what about our feeling? Perasaan dan rasa need to be included in imagery, and then it's going to give you the most effect compared to just visual. Okay, compared to just visual. So to know whether you are a visual or kinesthetic imagery, you may try this one. Okay, you may try movement imagery questionnaire ni, MIQ. Kita tengok boleh buka. Okay. So based on this MIQ, apa yang dia akan bagi, they will give you some question. Okay. They're going to scroll down until the end. Ni. They're going to give you some question. You take one. And you do the other. You take one. Okay, for example, yang ini. Okay, kita ambil yang ini. Nombor 1. Starting position. Okay. So, first, you need to conduct based on the instruction. Stand with your feet and leg together and your arms at your side. Berdiri tegak, tangan kat tepi. Now, raise your one knee as high as possible. Angkat kaki kanan setinggi mungkin. Angkat lutut tu, bengkokkan setinggi mungkin. Okay. Standing on one leg with your other leg flexed at the knee. Now, lower your leg so that you are again standing in two legs. Jadi, kita angkat kaki. Angkat kaki kanan. And when you angkat kaki kanan, determine or you need to remember the feeling of it. Macam mana rasa angkat kaki kanan? Okay. And then you turunkan. When you do that, after you turun, now, mentally task, that one is physical. Mentally task, assume the starting position. Okay. Assume means now you are sitting down. Imagine you are at starting position. Standing, you imagine you stand with your hand at the side. And then attempt to do the action. But now physically. Bayangkan kamu angkat kaki kamu. After you do that, you need to rate. Is your feeling equal with your feeling while you doing the action physically? Sama tak rasa dia? Ni kamu kena rate betul-betul lah based on your assumption. If you feeling, oh sama I can actually feel my right leg lifting up. I can feel the force at the hamstring and quadricep. When you have all those feeling, read. So after you finish conducting all of this, ada 14 soalan ni. Okay, habis je 14 soalan ni. Okay, buka balik dekat atas ni, dia akan bagi tahu bagaimana. Dia akan bagi tahu kat sini. This one. Tengok dekat bahagian procedure ni. Okay, method and measurement and procedure ni. Read that and determine whether you are visual or you are kinesthetic, or even better, you are nothing. Because when we talk about imagery, okay, some people can actually imagine a lot compared to others. Akan ada orang yang tak boleh bayangkan, betul, memang betul. Okay, imagine you are at the beach, dia tak boleh. He cannot imagine aku kat tepi laut, macam mana aku nak bayang aku dekat tepi laut. Dia tak boleh. So if you are one of that, meaning imagery practice is not your cup of tea. You cannot use that. Because at the first point, in order for mental practice to be beneficial, you need to be able to imagine. If you are not you are not able to do that, janganlah guna mental practice, gunalah cara lain. That will be about mental practice. So these are the two final topic for our motor control and learning. Okay, so don't forget to take your attendance. If you have any question, you may ask me directly. And thank you for your participation in today's session. See you again. Assalamualaikum and very good morning to all.